Hey there, welcome back to Grief, the emotional shitstorm you never signed up for. If this is your first time here, I'm Margaret, a woman's life empowerment and holistic grief coach, and I'm so glad that you have found this space. This series is all about navigating the messy, complicated, gut punching reality of grief. And today, we're diving into one of the most isolating, deeply personal, and rarely talked about forms of grief: infertility. This episode is a little bit different for me because I'm not just relying solely on research or experience working with my clients. I've actually lived this grief myself. And for 6 years, infertility was my reality. Talk about an emotional shitstorm. This one was seriously a hurricane. I don't think I've ever felt so much grief during that time. That 6 years really, really took its toll on me. And if you're going through it, you'll know what I mean. So, infertility itself, it's just such an intensely personal time. And for me, it was invasive, exhaustive, relentless, and it totally took over my body, my mind, my relationships, my emotions. Don't get me started on the emotions. And it was a sole focus of my life for 6 years. So if you've experienced infertility or are in the midst of it, you know exactly what I mean about it being like the only thing that you can focus on. Literally, the rest of the world tends to fall away, and it occupies every waking moment. For me, I'd wanted to be a mom my entire life ever since I was a little girl. Like, I would play with my dolls and I would pretend and I would babysit as many kids as I could. And I just loved being around children. And so the idea of being a mom was something that I just figured was a given. And so when we started to try and have children just after we were married, it was heartbreaking to find out that I couldn't conceive naturally or easily. And that something that always was portrayed in the media and the movies as something just, basically you could look lovingly across the room and boom, you'd be pregnant, that wasn't something that was happening for me. And so we went through the whole process of we had to wait a year to be able to see a fertility specialist. And deep down inside, I already knew something was wrong, but we still had to wait out the year, which was really, really hard because every month when I didn't get pregnant, it was more and more grief and more feeling like I was a failure. So when we finally got into seeing a specialist, we found out that we suffered from, very conveniently named, unexplained infertility, which is a great way for them to say that they really had no idea why we weren't getting pregnant. So that was another huge hit and left me feeling really devastated. Um, and the grief that comes along with infertility, it's all consuming. Like I said, you're focusing on this infertility issue day and night. The grief is day and night. It is all consuming. You feel it 24/7. And my grief, it lived inside me. It came in, it set up camp, it settled in for the long haul. And it was there day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year, every waking moment. And even in my dreams, I'd be dreaming about not having children or not being able to have children. It was all of me for so long. So if you're watching this episode and you've been through infertility or you're in the thick of it right now, please know that I see you and I know what it's like to be there. And my heart, oh, it goes out to you because this is one of the hardest things that you can go through. And for those of you who've never experienced infertility personally, I still encourage you to stick around and listen because chances are someone that you love has or will be going through infertility. And understanding this particular type of grief is one of the most supportive things that you can do. So stick around and listen and see what you can put into your toolbox to help those around you. All right, so let's talk about it. It's one of the big goals of this video series is to talk about grief, all forms of grief. So today, let's talk about the grief of infertility, the kind that doesn't come with a funeral, but it lingers in every failed pregnancy test, every lost embryo, every crushed hope for having a child. Infertility is a grief that really, it plays out in silence. It's not a single event that happens and then you begin to process it. It's recurring, relentless, over and over, almost like Groundhog Day loss every month that it doesn't work, every month that you don't get a positive pregnancy test. So infertility grief is the grief of a dream slipping away month after month, year after year. It's the grief of feeling like your body has completely betrayed you. It's not doing what we are led to believe is a natural function. It's the deep grief of loneliness. Even in a room full of people, even with a really supportive partner, you still feel so alone. I've always said grief is your own personal journey. And when you're going through this, you feel it. Your partner feels it. Your family feels it, but you all feel it differently. And because you're feeling it so deeply, you can feel so very alone in what you're going through. And I hear you. It's also the grief of constant hope, only to be met with heartbreak. And it's the grief of feeling unseen because society doesn't really recognize this pain the way it does other losses like death of a spouse or a parent. So if you're going through infertility treatments and going through this whole infertility journey and you're at work and you're out in society and we don't really talk about our journey, some people do, some people don't. When things don't work out for us every month, it's really hard to find support in and around because people say, oh, we'll try next month. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that a little bit later in the show. And infertility, it doesn't just affect you, the person going through it, you, the woman going through it. Infertility grief impacts your relationships, your identity, your mental and emotional health. And it creeps into every single area of your life in ways that you did not see coming. I know it did that with me. It was like I felt sidewinded or sideswiped or whatever that term is. I remember the roller coaster of hope and devastation, hope and devastation. And every month, tracking my cycle, taking blood tests, going through these increasingly invasive procedures, and building up the tentative hope that this time, this month, will result in a viable pregnancy. It was a cycle of hope, devastation, over and over. On top of that, the hundreds of doctor's visits, the ridiculous number of needles that you have to take. And I don't think I've shared this before, but I hate needles. Like I have to lie down to get my blood work done or I will pass out. And here I am going through a process where I'll tell you needles, I don't know, whoever makes the needles is making a lot of money. And you have to put needles in your belly and they have to take your blood. And there's needles all the time, every day, 24/7. I gave myself so many needles. I had bruises all over my stomach. I could lay track. It was crazy. Not to mention the medications that you take that make you feel like a stranger in your own body. And I'll tell you, there were times where I felt completely crazy and I didn't even recognize myself anymore. It was like a total out of body experience. The hormones that they put in you and your change in your moods, and it's just crazy. And the grief that comes from realizing that you're only able, or for me anyway, that I realized I was only going to be able to have a child with the help of these invasive clinical procedures that were being handled by strangers in lab coats. Now, that was a full body grief experience. It was so far from what I'd expected it would be like to become a mother and to have yourself poked and prodded, and everything becomes so clinical, and you lose that sense of love and connection and romance with your partner because it's all about tests and samples and more tests and more procedures. It really, really takes away from the idea of what I had grown up thinking my life would be in having a child. It was exhausting. It was frustrating, and it was so heartbreaking. And the worst part, when you're going through all of this is the world just keeps moving forward. Like there's nothing was happening. They don't know, the whole world doesn't know you're going through this. And so as you're going through this, you notice babies are being born around me. People are announcing pregnancies. There's baby showers and the whole well meaning but gut wrenching comments that come from people who just really don't understand your journey. It's kind of like when you get a new car, say you got a brand new red convertible. Once you buy that car, you're out on the road, you see red convertibles everywhere, right? It's the same thing when you're trying to have a baby. All you see around you are pregnant women and babies. Trust me, I know. As soon as I started trying to have a child and I couldn't, it seemed like all my friends were like, oh, we're pregnant, we're pregnant, we're pregnant. And it was like they just had to look at each other across the room. So it was really, really hard to be surrounded by all the success that people were having. And yet we were really struggling. I even remember one of my friends, when we talk about people saying insensitive things, sometimes they're being well meaning, sometimes they say it without even thinking. And I remember one friend saying to me, she was struggling with her toddlers. Her toddlers were running around, they weren't behaving, and she was getting really frustrated with them. And she just sort of turned to me and out of the blue said, "You're so lucky you don't have children." Wham. Like it was like being hit by a truck. And that one sentence cut me to the core. It was such a gut punch. I had to walk away. I was like, I can't believe you even said that. And now I know she didn't mean it to be hurtful. And it just came out in the moment because she was so frustrated, right? And it was just like, oh, but it hurt. She apologized and I love her for it. And we are still really, really good friends. In fact, we're still the best of friends. And I love her dearly. And I know in that moment, she didn't mean to say what she did in a way that she thought it would hurt me. She was just expressing a thought. And so, just so you know, it will happen. People are going to say things that are going to hurt you. And when we're going through infertility and we're pumped full of hormones, we're ultra sensitive to everything that's going on around us. So, the grief seems even deeper sometimes. So when I finally did get pregnant, and I did after 6 years, I got pregnant with twins. I thought the grief would just end. I'm like, I'm done. Infertility, where we got pregnant. This is great. It worked. I thought it would just go away. I wouldn't feel sad. I wouldn't feel, any of the things I'd been feeling around the grief of not being able to have a child. And I thought things would get better. I thought that we would finally have our family, that all of this poking and prodding and personal invasion of my body over the past 6 years would be worth it. And it was. It really, really was, to find out that I was pregnant and that I was having twins. But all of it came at a price, and one that I think in the whole process of wanting to have children, you kind of don't look at what the negative outcome could be from going through the process. I just was like, I was positive thinking. I'm like, I am pregnant. I'm having babies. This is amazing. But my pregnancy did come at a price. When you we went through in vitro fertilization, and that considers you a high risk pregnancy. So I actually went into labor at 5.5 months pregnant, and my daughter and son were born and whisked off to the neonatal intensive care unit. I saw them once and then off they went. My daughter, she was super strong, really stable, and she was only 1 pound, 3 ounces, like literally a pound of butter, right? And then my son, he was not as strong. He was struggling, he was unstable, and he was 1 pound, 5 ounces. So again, 2 little pounds of butter. They were so, so tiny when they were born. And so my daughter, she was our warrior, and my son, he was so sick. He was our wounded. And 3 days after they were born, we made the decision to take my son off life support, and he passed away in my arms. And I was left navigating not only the infertility grief that we'd just gone through, but also now the loss of a child as a brand new mother with full of hormones. It was a time. To say that this was a difficult time for me, for my partner, is a complete understatement. The loss of my son still affects me now, 16 years later. And I'm going to speak more to the loss of a child in a separate episode. I am happy to share, though, that my daughter is doing very well. She's 16 and just the most incredible kid you'd ever meet. Okay, so let's get back to infertility grief, which is what you're here to learn about. Infertility grief doesn't just disappear when you conceive. And for many women, it tends to linger and it really impacts how you experience your pregnancy, motherhood, and even the relationship you have with your body, right? Like this body was not doing what you needed it to do. And so while you're pregnant, maybe you're really afraid that it's not going to keep. And when you're a mom, you work so hard to have this child that there's this fear that it might be taken away. I still have that fear. I am still deathly afraid something will happen to my daughter and that I will lose her as well. That's a fear and it's a grief that I carry. There's a constant fear of this impending loss, and it is so important for you to face these fears and start to heal them. You've got to allow yourself to feel the fear and work through it, because otherwise it will run your life. And for those of you who never conceive, that grief that you're carrying, it transforms into something else entirely that you need to process and heal as well. And so let's talk about how infertility grief really impacts the different areas of your life, whether you have conceived and had a child or whether you don't conceive. The infertility grief component of that is still going to impact you. So first, it's going to impact the relationship you have with yourself. You may feel like your body's broken and that you're somehow failing. You might feel ashamed, even though you've done nothing wrong. You may feel like you're less of a woman, which is a complete lie, by the way, but one that our infertility grief kind of whispers over and over again in your ear that, you can't do what the other women do. It's not so easy for you. Maybe you weren't meant to have a child. I'll tell you that infertility grief, it's a bitch. Your infertility grief is going to impact your relationship with your partner. Infertility can put an unbelievable strain on your relationship. I know it did on ours. There is a lot of pressure, frustration, guilt, resentment, often going unspoken because you don't want to hurt the other person, but you're still carrying those feelings around for whatever reason. But you feel these so deeply, and both of you do. It's not just the woman who's going through it, it's the man too. And the frustration, the guilt, the resentment, the pressure, it's there, all underlying the surface. And then you might get to the point where one partner is way more optimistic and the other one's really resigned to the fact of what you're going through. And one might want to be ready to stop trying while the other one wants to keep going. So communication is 100% key there. Your relationship with your friends and family, it's going to be impacted, and your infertility grief that you carry around with you is going to impact that too. You may find that you're pulling away from people because it's too painful to be around pregnancy announcements and baby talk and baby showers. Some people will say the wrong things. We talked about that before. Then some people might say, oh, just relax, it'll happen. Or have you tried X, Y, Z? I think the best one I got was, go up and put your feet up in the air. Yeah, whatever. And then there's ones who'll be, well, maybe it's not meant to be. Oh, I hate that one. Spoiler alert, these comments do not help. They don't help. And even the most well-meaning people don't always understand. So don't expect them to understand, but it will impact your relationships with your friends and your family. Infertility grief will also impact your mental and emotional health. Infertility can cause anxiety, depression, PTSD-like symptoms, and a feeling of being out of control in your own life. I know for me, there was a period of time when I was going through infertility treatments that my entire world was black. I would open my eyes and all I would see was blackness and darkness. And it took everything inside of me to pull myself out of that. It was a very dark, dark place for me. And wanting to go forward, I kept pushing, I wanted, but it was dark. And it can feel all consuming. Like every decision, every plan, every hope is wrapped up in this one thing about having a baby. And sometimes it's to the point where you stop making plans and find yourself in perpetual limbo. which is not a good place to be in. So if this is you and you're going through infertility, how do you navigate this? How do you navigate this grief? How do you carry this grief and still keep living? It's a big question because we should be able to keep living. Should, I don't like the word should, but we need to be able to keep living. So I have 5 things for you that you can do to support yourself. Number 1, give yourself permission to grieve. Your grief is real. It is valid. And you don't need a funeral or a loss that other people will recognize in order to feel the pain. Your grief is love with nowhere to go. And infertility grief is filled with so much love. So give yourself permission to grieve. Number 2, choose who you share this journey with and set boundaries around that. You don't have to tell everyone what you're going through. Choose your safe people, the ones who are going to listen without trying to fix you or give you all this unsolicited advice. And it's okay. This is a big one. Listen up. It's okay to say no to going to baby showers, to say no to going to gender reveal parties. It's okay to walk away from conversations and experiences that hurt you. It's allowed. I'm giving you permission right now to do that. Number 3, protect your relationship with your partner if you have one. Some people go through infertility on their own. This journey can either strengthen or strain your relationship. So talk a lot. Communication is key. Be honest about how you're feeling, what you need. Support each other, even when you're grieving differently, and you will grieve differently. Number 4, find a support system. Infertility can feel so isolating, but you are not alone. There are communities, support groups, therapists, and coaches like myself who get it, who understand, and you deserve that support and you need that support while you're going through this. So reach out to someone. Number 5, decide what's right for you. This journey doesn't have just one path. You get to decide when to keep going, when to pause, when to stop. There is no right way to navigate this journey. It's very personal, and only do what feels best for you. What other people think does not matter. Infertility grief is really, really heavy. From what you've listened to, I'm sure you get that. It's complex, it's layered, and it can feel very, very lonely. But you don't have to carry it alone. There are people around you, like I just mentioned, family, friends, support groups, therapists, coaches who are there for you to walk beside you as you travel this deeply personal and heartbreaking journey. And I want you to remember something, and I really, really need you to hear me on this. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are worthy of love, support, and healing. And my wish for you is that you found some comfort and support in today's episode. And if you know of anyone who might benefit from this information, please, please share it with them. Something I want to leave you with as well. Often when we are experiencing grief, our past grief will surface and you'll find yourself dealing with it as well. And some of the grief that you'll recognize that you knew was there, and some you're going to be feeling stuff and you're not going to understand where it came from. So to help you with this, I invite you to download my free grief assessment in the description below. It's a tool that I designed to help you recognize where grief might be showing up in your life in ways that you didn't realize, ways and experiences in addition to the infertility that you're going through, because you can't heal what you don't know you're carrying within you. So the link to the free assessment is down below. And as always, I'm here sending you love and strength as you travel this journey. So until next time, remember, you are worth it.